This morning we're going to come together and share some ideas that may be all over the place. We're talking about rending the veil. And I say that the ideas may be all over the place for this reason. And that is something that I am keenly aware of, which is the inadequacy of words, the inadequacy of our language. Our language is a beautiful, beautiful evolution of our desire to communicate with one another, our desire to be understood, our desire to understand. But the words that we use are only symbols, only audible symbols of something deeper. Many years ago when I started working in the computer rooms, the way that the computers communicated with one another was over a modem, which stood for modulate and demodulate. And it worked over the telephone line, and this is how old I am. We actually, in order to establish that communication, a technician in one computer room had to pick up a telephone and dial the number of the other computer room, and a technician at that end had to answer. And then we put the telephone receivers down into the modem, which had two little rubber suction cups on them. And we pressed a couple of buttons at each end to get things going. And you could hear the data transmission over the phone, because it was a sound of audible tones. One tone meant 0, another tone meant 1, and you could hear the modem start to do the handshake and establish communications. So the sound, the particular frequency, the combination of frequencies that represented a 0 and represented 1, they were only symbols. They were symbols of zeros and they were symbols of 1. And in the computer language, the zeros and the 1s were also symbols of something else. The words that we use, the sounds that we use that are combined into words are only symbols. And they are symbols of something deeper within us that we really cannot adequately express. It's just beyond words. And even if we could find a word, I remember in English we were told that there's always one word that is exactly the best word for any given situation, and I never quite believed that. And I've gotten into arguments with some folks, but I never quite believed that. And here's the reason I never quite believed it is I don't care what word you use, what word I use. Everybody's got a different understanding of that. Everybody's got a different meaning for that. The other night, Lori and I were watching a movie, and there was a line of dialogue, and one of the actors said, he says, love is a strange word. He says, we use the same word to describe our feelings for our spouse or a pack of cigarettes. So whatever word we use is open to interpretation. There's this something within that we're trying to express. It kind of gets filtered through our background, our experience, our education, our vocabulary, and we choose a word or a phrase, and we think, well, this is it. And it goes through whatever medium. For those of you who are on the bridge, we had some noise on the bridge this morning. We were trying to talk, but we couldn't clearly communicate because there was some distortion for a little while. We try to communicate, and perhaps our words get distorted. Then they land on somebody's ear. And then that person goes through the process of trying to interpret what their meaning is, what they understand. So what we are talking about is something that is beyond words. It is the ineffable. In some of the prayers from India, they start out with, "O ineffable one, O ineffable one." It is the great unknown. It is the great unknown, but not the great unknowable. But it is not known by words. So the best we can do with words is we can kind of point in a direction. I was reading this in something that was written by a Hindu mystic who I'm studying. He said the absolute best words that we have, the absolute best words that we can think of, no matter how long we sit and look through the dictionary and the thesaurus, no matter how long we study it and we try to find exactly that right word and use that right word, it will never be good enough. Never. And then he gave us some hope. And he said, but it points to something. The words point to something. They indicate that there is something there. But what is there cannot be known by words. It cannot be known by the intellect. It can only be known by experience. So the words can give us the glimpse that there is this otherness, there is this experience, there is this something else to be experienced, to be had, if you want to put it in those terms. But the words can never describe exactly what that is. Now, the best we can kind of come to explaining this using our limited vocabulary, or at least my limited vocabulary, and the limited ability of words to convey the ideas and the feelings that we have. In class we use this a lot, which is the experience of chocolate. So I can tell you that there's this wonderful thing called chocolate cake. Oh my goodness, chocolate cake is just so wonderful. And I can describe everything about chocolate cake. I can tell you about the texture. I can try to tell you about the flavor. I can try to tell you about its sweetness. I can try to tell you about its bitterness. I can try to tell you about its smell. I can try to tell you everything that I can think of about chocolate cake. But if you've never had chocolate cake, you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. You may think you do. You may say, oh, yes, well, I understand it's like this, or it's like that, or it's like the other thing. But it's not like any of those. Whatever ideas you might conjure up, it's going to be different. It's going to be much different than that. The only way for you to know for yourself is to have a piece of cake for yourself. And when you do, your experience of chocolate cake may be entirely different than mine. And there's no way that you and I know that we had the same experience. We think we do. We assume we do. We say, well, our bodies are pretty much the same. Our tongues are made up pretty much the same. But you know that that's not true. You know there are people who can't taste certain things, and they can taste things that you can't taste. And there's people who can't see certain colors, and there's other people who can see things that we can't see. And we know, for example, that animals can hear things that we can't hear. Bees can see things that we can't see. So even though I can perhaps help you to discover the perfect piece of cake, we have no way of knowing. We have no way of understanding if our experiences were the same. Now I can go to the store and I can buy all of the ingredients. I can get a carton of milk, and I can get a dozen eggs, and I can get sticks of butter, and I can get a box of cake mix, whatever else goes into the cake, and I can send it to you with a recipe. And that recipe, of course, says, put this in a bowl, put that in a bowl, mix this together, take your butter, grease the pan, pour your batter in, all of those things. It'll tell you step by step. Excuse me while I get some water. It'll tell you step by step what it is that you need to do in order to bake your own chocolate cake. Now, once you do those things, once you engage in those steps, you do the technique. See, if you follow the instructions, you will get the chocolate cake. Then you can eat the cake. Then you can have your own experience of cake. But if I send you the instructions, or somebody else sends you the instructions, and you just leave everything kind of sit on the shelf, you're going to get around to it someday. Not today, I've got other things to do. Then there's nothing that anyone can do to help you. It is something that you have to do for yourself. And of course the Buddha tells us this, that our spiritual growth, our awakening, our realization of the true self, our experience of things as they truly are. See, that is an inside job. No one can do that for us. No one can do that to us. We have to follow the instructions. We have to follow the recipe. We have to do the technique. We have to do the practice. That's the only way we're going to get to eat the cake. Now, what does this have to do with rending the veil? Rending the veil. This is something that, as a child growing up, I was raised in the Catholic Church, and of course, the week before Easter, which is coming up upon us here soon, the week before Easter was called Holy Week, and that entire week there were different services, different types of services that we would go to church and school. I went to a parochial school. We would participate in, and they would kind of remind us of and kind of do some sort of a reenactment, if you will, the Stations of the Cross, but to remind us about the final week in Christendom, the week leading up to the crucifixion and then the resurrection of Jesus. And in the New Testament, there is something that was called the rending of the veil. And in the New Testament, it is at the very moment that Jesus dies. It says when Jesus gave up the Spirit, the veil was rended in two. And what that is referring to is in the sacred tabernacle, the temples in Judaism, there was a very heavy curtain. Dr. Rocco Errico tells us it was about 4 inches thick, this very heavy curtain, and it separated part of the temple from the most holy, or the Holy of Holies part of the temple, where the Ark of the Covenant was in the Temple of Solomon. But kind of symbolic, it represents the place where the presence of God is, you see. And there was this curtain, this veil that separated the two. But at that very moment, according to the New Testament, at that very moment that Jesus gave up the Spirit, that veil was rended. And what we were taught is that the symbolism of that, and you have to remember it's symbolism that we're talking about here, because the words get in the way. The words are inadequate. So when words start to fail us, we revert to symbols, we revert to metaphor, we revert to simile, we revert to allegory, because the words just won't do it. So we have this symbol of the veil, and the veil represented the separation between God and man. Right? Remember, if you follow that mythology of along, right? Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden. There was this separation. And the spiritual path then is to try to get back into the garden, to the tree of life. So there was this idea of separation. And Dr. Holmes tells us that all of our problems, all of the problems that we experience in life, are due to a belief in separation. Notice he didn't say that the separation was actual. He said it was a belief in separation. But it's done unto us according to our belief. If we believe we are separated, we have the experience of separation. So the rending of the veil, in my recollection of my education, which I am sure, well, it was flawed from the beginning, but is at this moment that the Christ is fulfilled, if you want to think of it that way. This belief in separation that was represented by the veil It's dissolved. It is done away with. You see, it is penetrated. The veil has been penetrated. And you have to wonder why the veil was there in the first place, you see. Were the ancients who decided that it needed to be there? Were they showing us a symbol? Were they telling us something? You know, there's this veil that seems to be there. And you're going to have to get beyond that. You're going to have to get beyond that if you wish to experience the presence of the divine. Experience the presence of the divine. Now, it's not just Judaism and Christianity that uses the veil as a symbol, but also in the Hindu teaching and the Buddhist teaching, it is referred to as a veil. See, we don't see things as they are because we're looking and we see the veil. St. Paul in the New Testament said, it is as if we have been looking through a glass darkly, looking through a dirty window, looking through a dirty mirror. We don't see things as they truly are. So the goal, if we want to think of it as a goal of the spiritual practice then, is to be awakened to the nature of things as they truly are. To recognize and discover our true self, our real self. To find the Christ within, the place where the divine has become human. And when we realize that, the veil is rended. So, the game was in progress when we got here. Life was in progress when we got here. Buddhism teaches us this. And we are trying to figure it out. We're trying to figure out, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? How did I get here? Why did I get here? You know, did I make a conscious decision to come here? Were we all sitting in a green room somewhere as little souls waiting to come into the world and deciding what we would do, as some teachings tell us? All of these important questions that we ask, you see, and we ponder. And we start to recognize that we don't really know because our perception is limited. We do not see things as they are. We see things as we are. The sensory input kind of comes into somewhere. We're going to talk more about that in a minute or so. But the input of the five senses comes in somewhere. But then it's processed. Then we start to add value to it. We label it, we identify it. We remember a similar time that we had that sensory input, you know. We hear a song and we go back, oh, I remember the first time I heard that song, you know. Or you have your song, you and your significant other, you have your song, the song that has special meaning to you. Maybe the first time you met, maybe the first time you danced, the first time you kissed. And that song comes on and suddenly it's not just your eardrum vibrating in harmony with the sounds. See, suddenly you are experiencing that special moment when it became your song. So you're not hearing the song as it is. You are hearing the song as you are. So we start to understand then, excuse me, that our view of the world, our view of the nature of things is not as things are. It is greatly limited. It is greatly impaired, if you will. It is impaired by the function and the capability currently of our brain, and it is impaired by our belief about what we can and cannot do, and what we can and cannot know, and how thought works and where thoughts come from. At some point, we get to realize that, as I said a few weeks ago, we really don't know anything. We just think we know. This is the veil. This is the veil of ignorance, you see. What an amazing thing life is. That it seems that at whatever level life is expressing itself, it completely tries to fulfill that level. It tries to explore that level at every possible way, every shape, every form, every way that it can. But then it's still not satisfied, because it pushes forward into a new expression, into a different expression, into, for lack of a better term, into a greater expression of itself. So we'll start with energy. Now, we have to ask, was energy always here? Does energy always exist? I mean, the laws of conservation of energy that we learned in physics tells us that energy cannot be created, nor can it be destroyed. It can only be changed. And it also, the laws of physics also tell us that the energy is diffusing. It is being scattered. It is being scattered about. And the only way that we can bring energy back together and concentrate it is by using more energy to do that, and then that energy is scattered out. So it seems like energy would be the final resolution if we kind of work backwards through evolution, that we get to this thing called energy, just pure energy. And we have to ask, well, where did that come from? Why is that there? Was it always there? Was there a time that there was no energy? Some physicists will tell us yes, and some will say no. But for today, we will start with energy. Just assume that the energy was always there. Or if it came from someplace else, we won't worry about that today. We'll worry about that tomorrow. So you could think of energy. We have all of these different forms and expressions of energy. You have X-rays, and you have gamma rays, and you have electricity, and you have magnetism, and you have all of these different forms of energy. But something compelled them to take form, to become matter, to take form. So poetically we might say, well, the energy wasn't satisfied. The energy wasn't satisfied just being pure energy. It wanted to have something different, something perhaps more tangible, something more specific. So it became matter. It became form. It took shape. It became form. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh. It took shape. It took form. So now we have stars, and we have planets, and we have water, and we have minerals. Life descended from the energy to matter. But the matter the matter didn't give up the energy. The matter is energy. Right? Einstein tells us E equals mc squared. Matter and energy are the same thing. And now we have energy expressing itself as matter, but it is also still energy. We can take a lump of matter and we can convert it back to energy. We can understand intellectually that there are protons and electrons and neutrons, and there's a tremendous amount of activity and energy within this thing that appears to be inert. But the matter is not satisfied. So the matter produces life. Single-celled animals in the ocean, plants on the soil. It produces life. So at each level, what we're talking about is the descent of the divine consciousness into its creation. Divine consciousness into its creation. We would say that the consciousness must be present with the energy, if the energy is part of the divine. We would say that the consciousness must be present in the matter, if the matter is part of the divine. But it seems that there's a veil. You see, it seems that there's a veil. If we just look at the matter, we can't see the energy. And if we just look at the energy, we can't see the divine. It takes a little while, it takes a little practice, it takes a little work to do that. But then matter, this is me, this is my description of it, matter wasn't satisfied. So it became life. Now life still contains matter, right? Life still uses our bodies, which are nothing more than the dust of the earth. Life takes the minerals, and it takes the water, and it takes the sunshine, and it takes the air, and it takes all of these very, very seemingly intangible things that they're not alive, but somehow life uses them for its purpose. I remember as a boy in high school, somebody wrote something somewhere at the time that if you took the human body and if you could just take all of the chemicals and minerals and all of the material things that make up the human body and put them together into a jar, what you would have would be worth $1.68. And that was the joke. That was the joke that we would tell each other in high school. You're only worth $1.68. But the implication of that is so amazing. How can $1.68, of course that was $1960, how could $1.68 worth of chemicals figure out how to put themselves into our bodies? So the matter became life. And life kind of loses its touch with matter, doesn't recognize itself much as matter. I mean, you and I don't look at ourselves and say, oh, look, $1.68 worth of chemicals. There's a veil. There's a veil. So even though there is this seeming veil of consciousness, even though as the divine consciousness descended into its creation, it went into what the mystics would call self-forgetfulness, self-imposed ignorance, if you will. It went dormant for a while, and it started to express itself only at the level that it could based on the expression. So when it was a rock, it could only express itself as minerals do, chemically. When it became a plant, it could express itself as a plant. When it became birds of the air, fishes of the sea, creatures of the forest, it expressed itself differently. And then when it became human, it could express itself even differently. But at each level, it seemed to be, or seems to be, limited by that form of expression. It seems to be limited by that form of expression. There seems to be separation, but there is not, because that which created all of this is still present within all of this. That which is evolving was involved and is involved in the evolution from the beginning. Now what this means is, to us in our spiritual growth, is that we wish to penetrate the veil of ignorance. We wish to rend the veil that seems to be separating us but is not really there. And we wish to see things as they are. We wish to experience things as they are. And we want to recognize through experience the presence of the divine that is already with us. That's the cake. That's the cake that we want to eat. But in order to do so, we must be willing to penetrate the veil. We must be willing to rend the veil. And we are the only ones who can do that for ourselves. No one can do it for us. Growth is an inside job. So we recognize then that as this thing called life, as it pushes itself forward, as it moves forward through these different levels, that it functions in a manner that is appropriate at that level, but there's more. But there is always more. You and I are more than $1.68 worth of chemicals. There is always more. There is an intelligence behind it all, making it all work. There is a drive behind it all, pushing it all forward. We come from the bliss, we live in the bliss, we return to the bliss. There is something within us that is not satisfied where we are. Just as the energy wasn't satisfied as energy, so it became a rock. And the rock wasn't satisfied as a rock, so it became life. And life wasn't satisfied as life, so it became conscious. And consciousness wasn't satisfied with itself, so it became self-consciousness. There is something within you and I that is pushing us, compelling us, moving us forward. This is, we talked the last couple of weeks about the inevitableness of God. Resistance is futile. The inevitableness of God pushing us forward. But it can only push us so far, and then we have to cooperate by penetrating the veil, by rending the veil. And by that, I simply mean by discovering and experiencing the presence that is already within. To do that, we need technique. To do that, we need a recipe to follow, and then we must follow it. You know, it does no good to have every recipe book that was ever printed on your bookshelf if you never open one up and prepare something from it. It does no good to know all of the paths and all of the techniques that all of the spiritual teachers have taught us over the ages if we do not latch on to one and get started and stay with it, or if led to another, to stay with that. We must follow the recipe. So the techniques then, all of the different techniques that we will get from the different spiritual teachers, from the different religious practices, are techniques that help us to get centered, Now, centering is not the end point, but centering is a requirement. It's like opening the door. It is the gate, if you will, for us to experience the presence of the divine. Remember I said the other week that which got us where we are sometimes holds us back. And what got us, human beings, what got us where we are is this mental activity, this activity of thought, this ability of the mind to go forward and plan, the ability of the mind to go in the past and learn from the past and then project that into the future. The ability of the mind to, it seems to be able to do many things at once, but it's really doing just one thing at a time very, very quickly. We have the ability to be everywhere in consciousness, you know. If I tell you about the Eiffel Tower, you're there. You're there. You remember what it looks like. You saw it in a movie. You know, maybe you were there. Your mind immediately flits here, there, and everywhere. This is the grasshopper mind. This is the monkey mind. This is what I call trying to start a fire with a magnifying glass, but not holding the magnifying glass steady. If you want to start a fire with a magnifying glass, you have to focus the rays of the sun and you have to hold them steady. If you do that, you can get a fire started. If you don't do that, you won't. So the techniques of centering then are the equivalent of holding that magnifying glass still and allowing the rays of the sun to be in one place for a long enough period of time that the cake will bake, that the experience will come, because the experience is already there. You don't have to reach out there and grab the experience of the presence of God and pull it to you. It is already there. It is already there waiting to reveal itself to you, but you must center. You must center. So in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, there are 112 different techniques, 112 different recipes. In many different teachings. There are different ways. When we were studying the Kabbalah and Judaism, the tree of life, right? We were trying to get back to the garden to get to the tree of life. We left the garden because we wanted to eat from the knowledge of good and the knowledge of evil, but now we want to get back into that garden. See, we want to get back into that garden and eat from the tree of life. And in the Kabbalah, they give us the symbolism of the tree of life, and there are 32 paths on that tree. 32 paths that must be mastered, if you will, before we can advance to the next tree, And you may be familiar with people who talk about the 32nd degree in Masonry. It's a referral back to the esoteric path of the mystics, the 32 paths. Whatever path you choose, whichever one, I mean, we go through this period where we know we're not satisfied. We're kind of like the energy that's not satisfied and wants to become matter, and matter is not satisfied and wants to become life. And we are not satisfied. We are searching for something. And we don't know what we're searching for, and we don't know why we're searching. But we come to realize that that which is causing us to seek, that is what we are seeking. The divine made us for itself, to find itself, to love itself, to be one with itself. And then we must take a path. And we must stay with the path. We must follow the instructions. We must use the recipe until the cake is baked. So I'm going to give you just one technique. I'm just going to give you one technique for today. There is no shortage of techniques. You have to find one or more that you will stay with. Because constantly reading about techniques and not using them won't do any good. Remember the saying, don't go looking for God unless you do so as earnestly as you would look for a pond if your hair was on fire. Be focused, be committed. Penetrate the veil with the techniques. All right, so we have 5 senses. But all of those senses come together someplace in what we call mind or what we call consciousness. So if you're at a place where you can close your eyes for a minute, just close your eyes, take a breath, get relaxed, and think of yourself as a beautiful flower with 5 petals, 5 different colored petals on it, almost like a peacock's feathers. You are this beautiful, multicolored flower. And each of the petals represents a sense. Sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. And become aware of what's going on with each of those senses. What are you hearing? If your eyes are closed, you're still seeing. What are you seeing? What are you feeling on your skin? What is the taste on your tongue? What is it that you smell? Become aware. Become keenly aware. And now follow each of these senses inward. Where did the sound on your ears go once they enter you? Where does the light on your eyes go once it enters you? Where does the feeling from your skin go once it enters you? And try to find that center within you. Center it in the heart. And in the heart you have this beautiful center with this beautiful flower with multicolored leaves, 5 leaves. and just be there in the center. If your mind wants to wander, bring it back gently, lovingly. Stay centered. All right, that's one simple technique. It's kind of delightful, kind of fun, leaves you with a pleasant feeling. At least it leaves me with a pleasant feeling. Don't worry yet about what's beyond that. Don't go into that and say, well, what do I experience next? Just find the center. Find the center and stay in the center. If that technique doesn't work for you, find another. As I say, there's 112 in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Find another. Follow a sound as it enters, comes in. Where does it go? Find the gap between your breaths. Find a way to move to the center. Once we get to the center, then we can penetrate the veil. We can move through the ignorance that keeps us from seeing things as they are, from seeing ourselves as we are, from experiencing the reality. We are a whole lot more than $1.68 worth of chemicals. And we can begin to experience that. But first we must penetrate the veil. Just do it. So it is.